Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor 44 following episode 5, the final episode before the merge, and I found this episode to be pretty predictable by the end of it, and the overall result to be a bit underwhelming, as obviously I wish there had been a regular vote, but we'll get into that more in a moment. But there are 13 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 13, we have the person who left the game from this week, but here we have Matthew, who obviously quits the game due to a shoulder injury becoming too much. And I was a bit conflicted over this coming into the episode, where we saw in the preview that this episode was going to focus more on a shoulder injury. We even saw a focus of it in last week's episode as well, and there was this thought that he could be medevaced. However, the main reason I had him a bit higher last week was because even with this focus in the promo, I felt like he was still a relatively big character, someone who I thought was going to have a bit more longevity, even though I felt like he was still more so a big character than a top contender. But obviously he goes out here, and I found it to be pretty predictable, where we saw the focus happening very early in the episode. It just felt to me that this was just going to be the end of him. And when we saw the whole evaluation after the challenge, which then turned to him getting this confessional where he had to decide, I felt like it was very obvious from that point on that he was going to ultimately pull himself. And especially with the amount of time left in the episode, I just felt like there wasn't enough time to do a regular round. And plus, with it being Tika, it just made the most sense for Matthew to go here. And I do feel bad for him. I understand his decision to leave the game, as it's tough. He seemed to be in a lot of pain. And given what he described in his exit interview, he went through a lot of treatment even after the season. And he did play a pretty good game outside of that. He did have some good ideas. And it seemed like he was in a pretty strong position moving forward on his tribe, particularly if he did make the merge. But obviously, he does leave the game here. And I understand his decision. But since he's out of the game now, I do have to leave him here at number 13. And with that, there are 12 players left in the game to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win, based on their edit and current game position. But at number 12, we have the person who is probably the most dunked on this week, although they did get a little bit of positivity. But here we have Josh. And I feel like Josh was probably going to be the boot here had Matthew not quit the game, as we obviously saw Carolyn and Jam get back together, and it seemed like they were about to vote together. But even outside of that, he gets dunked on to a decent degree, particularly with the whole fake idol, where he spends a lot of the episode trying to convince them that he has a fake idol, only for that to backfire when he decides to show it, and we see Carolyn and Jam immediately recognize that it's fake. So obviously that's pretty bad, and even outside of that, I just feel like he has been pretty under-edited for the most part, not to mention the fact that Carolyn was poo-pooing this whole potential Alpha Bros alliance that Josh would seem to be a pretty strong contender for. Although he does get a bit of positivity here, he does get his intro package talking about his medical history, although even then, I feel like that could just be setting him up to be the boot in the next couple of episodes. And I feel like if we are looking at who's going to be the potential merge boot, I think Josh is definitely up there as one of the more likely contenders. Now I'll talk about some other contenders as we go through this list, but all in all, I just don't feel that great about Josh. I don't feel like he's winning, and because of that, he is here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have another player that I think had a mostly bad episode, and probably on the surface a worse episode than Josh. However, I feel like they're less likely to be booted soon, but here we have Jamie. And Jamie didn't have a good episode either. She got this confessional about fitting into Soka, and she feels like she's in the center of everything. And we even see her underestimate Matt by saying that he's crawling while everyone else is running a marathon, only for Franny to immediately contradict her, saying that she's glad that, Jamie is comfortable approaching her to talk about Matt, and that she could alert Matt if Jamie's planning to target him. All in all, it's not looking good for Jamie, and plus, mixing everything else together, I just don't think she's a very likely winner. Now, granted, I had her a little bit higher last week simply because of her position on the Soka tribe given her idol, but now that she's going to the merge, I'm not exactly sure where she's going to fit in. Now, I don't think she's going to be the merge boot per se, however, I still don't think she's going to be super long for the game in the future, which is why she is here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have another player who has largely confused me in the edit, although here we have Kane. And Kane made the merge, which I'm a little happy by considering I did personally root for Kane coming into the season. Although I feel like this wasn't the best episode for him where we see him bonding with Carson. Although even then I feel like that's more so propping up Carson due to his ability to get information from people, more so than it highlighting this relationship on Kane's end. So I feel like it wasn't that good of an episode for Kane, and really his entire edit has been a bit jumbled in my opinion, where it feels like it occasionally has this positivity attached, but not really to the point where it's really giving him much of a storyline in the future. However, I will also say that my view of his game has gone up, where before I felt like he was at the bottom of Raw 2 and that he would have been the next boot had they gone to the next tribal. However, it now turns out that he actually had a very strong relationship with Matthew, to the point where Matthew even wanted to give Kane his idol on his way out, but obviously wasn't allowed to go back to camp to say goodbye, so that wasn't able to go through. However, with this knowledge, it does seem like had they gone to another tribal, that those two would have teamed up with Carson to take on Brandon and Lauren, probably Lauren, given she wouldn't be able to use her extra vote on a revote if it were a tie. So I feel like Kane was actually in a better position in the pre-merge, and I feel like through that my view of his game has gone up. Although it's not really enough to prop him up on this ranking here, especially considering that we don't really see this relationship in the edit as much. So I feel like Kane is kind of all over the place, and I could see him being an early merge boot. However, I could also see him being sort of a late game boot as well. I feel like it's just kind of all over the place, but not really leaning towards a win, which is why he is here number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have someone who literally got no content this episode, but here we have Lauren. And Lauren has largely confused me so far, where I've been getting these comments of people saying that Lauren has this under the radar winner edit going on, that she has all these winner quotes talking about how she eats the worm and that she'll do anything for her game when she goes on the summit. And to me, none of this really feels like it has much substance to it. And considering that Lauren herself has not really been propped up in the edit that much, to where I believe this is now the second episode where she's gotten no content and there isn't really much of an explanation for it, I feel like Lauren doesn't really have the winner's edit in my eyes. Now, I don't deny it completely, and I could be open to being wrong, obviously, if it turns out that Lauren's edit shoots up in the post-merge. However, I feel like based on what we got from the pre-merge, I just don't see it right now. And I recognize that there are these people that are telling me that I should be higher on Lauren, but I just don't see it. I feel like her edit is not consistent enough. I feel like it doesn't have enough depth to it to where I can justify having her any higher, especially considering her closest relationship with Brandon, which we've barely seen on the show up to this point. So at the end of the day, I just can't be that high on Lauren based on what we've been seeing so far. Now, if she does shoot up more in the post-merge, then I will be a bit more open to putting her up higher on this list. Although I feel like given the evidence I currently have, I feel like 9 is about as high as I can put her. Now moving on to number 8, and we have a player who got a very mixed bag, although more so negative. But here we have Danny. And Danny did get kind of dunked on here, where he obviously goes on the summit and he gets to bond a lot with Brandon, talks about building this bros alliance, while Carolyn is sitting right there, and Carolyn openly talks about feeling left out of these talks. And it almost feels like Danny and Brandon are talking as if Carolyn's just not going to survive this tribal. And it's even more insane considering that Josh seems more likely to be included in this alliance if they were to make the merge. And now that both him and Carolyn are going to make the merge, I feel like that's just setting up Carolyn to take a shot at this alliance in the future. So it's just really insane the way Danny is presented here. Now, he does get some positive content earlier on, like he's shown leading the meditation session. He gets this intro package talking about his daughter and that he's channeling his loved one's energy for later on. However, I feel like he's already been undermined enough in the edit to where I just don't see him winning. I feel like he is just gonna have this fun little downfall later on to where he's obviously not gonna win. Now, yes, he did get a bit more positivity than I was expecting, and he is someone who has been a bit more visible in the edit, although there's more actively bad in his edit to where number 8 is about as high as I can put him. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, but here we have Brandon. And Brandon is sort of in line with Danny, goes on the summit, and obviously talks about this bro lines and doesn't seem very aware that Carolyn is annoyed by all this. However, I feel like the focus was more so on Danny in this interaction than Brandon, and I feel like Danny is more so the person we're supposed to be rooting against in this situation, whereas I feel like Brandon was more so the secondary figure in all this. Although at the end of the day, it's not good either. And I feel like outside that, he hasn't really gotten much content as of late. I feel like his only content of real substance was in the premiere, as well as episode 3, where he got his intro package. And I feel like at this point, I just don't see the win there for Brandon. And I'm not sure what his longevity is. I could see him being an early merge boot, especially if this Bros Alliance is going to be targeted right away, right at the merge. I feel like him or Josh could be that merge boot if that alliance is being targeted. Although even then, I feel like he's not poised to win based on his edit up to this point, which is a big reason I have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I really debate these next two, as I feel like they each have different pros and cons. However, at number 6, I kind of decided to go with my gut here, but here we have Franny. And the main reason I have Franny this low is I think at this point it's 100% guaranteed that Matt is going to outlast Franny, and I feel like Franny is just going to be some collateral damage in a move made against Matt that could result in Matt having this underdog story later on. And if that read is correct, then Franny is pretty much screwed here. And I'll also say as well that given her edit up to this point, where she has been getting this relatively consistent edit, but not one that is overly based on her story, and it feels more so focused on her relationship with Matt, I think there's a lot of risk that Franny could be an early merge boot. Now, the one thing that's saving her is the emergence of this Bros Alliance, particularly with Danny and Josh, to where I could see her skating on by through that initial vote, particularly if the majority flips against them. I don't think it's a guarantee she's a merge boot. However, I feel like her edit is in line with these people that are consistent enough presences, but still like not enough to where they're going to win. And they're more so there to make the early merge have this notable big round. So at the end of the day, I can't justify having Franny too much higher because of that short-term concern. However, if she's able to skate on by through these next couple of rounds, I could see her going up in my estimation. However, it's that short-term worry that leaves her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I did consider putting this person below Franny simply because this episode wasn't as good for them. In fact, they didn't get really any content. However, I feel like there's still enough potential upside for them to be in contention. But here we have Heidi, and Heidi got pretty much no content this episode. Now, granted, she didn't necessarily need to, given Sokka didn't go to Tribal. However, I still have this worry that she could just be purpled until deep in the game. She could be this late game threat and be taken up because of that. However, she did still have that setup to her storyline in the premiere about her being underestimated and that she is playing the game. So I feel like that alone is enough to make me think that she could have the story later on the merge, and particularly once her ally in Danny gets taken out, I think she could potentially pick at the pieces and cultivate something in the future. Now, at the end of the day, I feel like her edit hasn't been consistent enough to where I'm that confident. However, I feel like if I had to pick between Franny and Heidi, I would say Heidi has a bit more longevity in the game than Franny, which is why I do have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and realistically, this top 4 is probably my definitive top tier, as I feel like these 4 players have by far the most developed edit and have the strongest case to win because of that. However, it's just a matter of ordering them, but at number 4, I did decide to go with Carson, and I feel like Carson is here mainly out of necessity, although I will say that now that Matthew is out of the game, and also the fact that Tika seems to be the complex tribe of the season, I think Carson has more longevity now than I gave him credit for before, where initially I said that Carson was probably going to be like this Evie figure, someone who is probably going to be taken out early merge, be this representative for the tribe that gets picked off. However, at this point, I think Carson has a bit more going on because of that. Now, at the end of the day, I still feel like he falls into this trap of being a big character, someone that's eventually going to be sniped out of the game for being such a big threat, and probably an obstacle for the eventual winner to overcome. However, I feel like compared to the rest of the field, I have the most merits to say about Carson. He has been getting consistent content throughout the season, consistent strategic content, and consistent content talking about his relationships in the game. So I feel like because of that, I kind of have to put him at number 4, even though realistically, I think he's just eventually going to be taken out as a big threat. But with the rest of the field having such blatant holes in their edit, I feel like I had to put him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have the same person I had at number 3 last week, but here we have Matt. And as I said a moment ago with Franny, I think Matt is clearly going to outlast Franny at this point, as I feel like their relationship is eventually going to be broken up, where Matt is going to be the survivor in the situation, and in turn, Matt will have this underdog story. And in general, I think that was brought up here with Jamie underestimating Matt and him getting a bit of content talking about that. Although even then, it was more so Franny talking about the fact that Matt is being underestimated. But still, I feel like it is a consistent storyline that will lead to Matt having a very deep run on this season. And I feel like he also has fewer holes than other people, to where realistically, I could see him crack into this top 2 here and potentially be the top contender by the end of it, depending on how this post-merge shakes out. Although there's still that worry that he could just fall off, he could just continue to be a failure and obviously lose at the end. But the fact that he has this consistent storyline and is clearly meant to be this major character on the season is enough to have him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and we have a bounce back episode for this person, but here we have Jam Jam. And I feel like this was the episode he needed, where I feel like this last episode was pretty bad for him, where he obviously was shown to be on the wrong side of this Carolyn conflict. And even for a lot of the episode, it seemed like Jam Jam was still like not trusting Carolyn too much. But then we see him later on the episode like come back around, and him realizing that he's seeing the Carolyn that he knew from earlier on. But even before that, he's shown talking quite a bit with Josh. He gets plenty of personal content talking about his experience with coming out as gay, which is pretty good there. And again, he is a pretty fun character, also in the complex tribe, which I think really helps him. And I think the other thing that puts him over someone like a Matt is the Matt chat. And I feel like that's something that I didn't really talk as much about in these power rankings, but for those of you who don't know, I made a video a couple weeks ago talking about the history of the Matt chat on Survivor. And I noticed there's been a lot of discussion this season about the Matt chat, which has obviously propped up the people that got a Matt chat, with Jam Jam being one of them, along with Franny and Matthew, who are now out of the game. Now, realistically, I haven't really factored this much into my week-to-week power rankings, as I didn't want to place all my credence into that. I felt like we just needed more evidence, as even in that video, I clarified that the Matt chat is not the be-all end-all, that you need other things going your way on top of the Matt chat in order for it to really be a meaningful indicator. However, I feel like with Jam Jam, he seems the most likely winner of these 3 Matt chat people, as obviously Matthew's now out of the game, and Franny is someone who, like I said, I don't think is winning at this point. And I think with Jam Jam versus Matt, while I think there's more knocks you can point to with Jam Jam's edit up to this point, I feel like they've been rectified enough. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel like right now, I feel like the Matt chat is giving Jam Jam a bit of an edge over someone like a Matt, for instance. So I think that was something to take in consideration as well. But I still feel like Jam Jam is going to be set up pretty well moving forward. However, I feel like the number 1 person has been getting more proof of them being a top contender versus Jam Jam, who has gotten this negativity to begin with. So I feel like that was enough to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 44 right now is still Carolyn, who I think is the narrator of the season, where she had another pretty big episode. And again, it's one that was necessary, so I don't think you can chalk it up to her just being overexposed, although even then I will acknowledge that is at least a partial concern on her end. But I feel like compared to like Jam Jam, I feel like she has been shown to be on the right side of things. And despite her being underestimated, she has consistently had opportunities to talk about the fact that she's underestimated. And I think that's a pretty big theme with her across the season, where people just see her as this loud, kooky, emotional player, when in fact she is very self-aware and that she is very willing to play actively. And I feel like she has been given opportunities to prop herself up because of that. And I think the other thing about her screen time is the fact that she is naturally a big character. And I feel like she's always going to get that screen time. Mix that in with her being on the complex tribe, and I think there's a serious case to make that Carolyn is the clear frontrunner at this point. Now, yes, we could still get to the merge and that she could start to fall off. I could see her being set up to be a losing finalist. However, I feel like with the evidence that I currently have, I feel like Carolyn is the pretty clear frontrunner based on everything we've seen from her. She has gotten consistent content. She has gotten consistent strategic content. She has been shown to be on the right side of many situations. And I think she has the clearest storyline out of everyone on the season outside of Matt, but I still think those are all things that could lead to a Carolyn win by the end of it. So while it's still halfway into the season, I feel like Carolyn currently has the most evidence of the potential winners at it, which is why I do over here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. Now moving forward, I'll be doing these power rankings again next week, so stay tuned for that. I'm currently covering Big Brother Canada 11, so you can expect coverage of that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.